Thank you for having and I'd also like to thank our sponsors of the Innovating Forum, KPMG and Energy BBDO. They are the ones that allow us to put on events like this, and without them, we really could not do this. And so, thank you so much for providing this type of cutting-edge content to our members and our guests. So, thank you. And we're about to hear from a really esteemed group of experts. We have Jeff, Brad, Sadie, and Lauren on pushing the boundaries in the industry. This is like a product at this point. I don't need fun. It's okay. I'm loud enough. Yeah. So, with the rapid pace of change in this industry, brands are hungrier than ever to capture and understand customer preferences or fuel personal marketing at scale. We're really excited to hear if they have the secret sauce to achieving this. And you can read more about each panelist in the handout found at your seats. We're trying to not spend time on that because we want to just really dig into the content. There's so much we want to get through in a short period of time. Jeff, will we leave with he will be taking audience questions, and he'll let you know how he wants to handle that. So without further ado, welcome to our panelists. Thank you.
Okay, there you go. Thank you for coming on this beautiful day, and again, thanks to MillerCoors for opening up their pub. 75 people attending. I think that's a statement to folks on this panel and the attraction of a pub. I'm Jeff Atkins, Managing Director of Energy BBDO. We're a creative agency here in Chicago. We work on brands, a variety of brands across categories in the U.S. and globally. And we have a great pleasure of working with MillerCoors. Cape Wine, I can't bend down and hold it up, but there you go. Cape Wine, the drink of the summer. Buy some now and stock up for later, more of it. So, like most people in this room that are in marketing, at the agency, our top priority right now is really learning how to harness the potential of data to develop smarter strategies, more compelling content, and more innovative experiences for our consumers. And we all know that the access to data combined with what technology allows us to do with it is helping us develop, or can help us create more powerful insights, better, more relevant messaging, more personalized messaging, more frictionless experiences online, and really convert sales more efficiently, and just so much more. I mean, we're really scratching the surface of what data and technology is going to allow us to do in terms of consumer marketing going forward. But for us, and for me, and I think for most people in most companies, it's really a transformational journey. We're, in some cases, evolving from, really working in a marketing world dominated by mass media to a world where we're going to use data to deliver precision, but do it at scale, or as Lauren would talk about, mass precision. And we're also shifting how we do retail from traditional structures to e-com, decom, or just digitally assisted shopping. So there's a lot going on in terms of our old ways of working and migrating to completely new models. And we're all on this path together. Depending on the company, the industry that you're working in, you might be at a different point. We're all experimenting, we're all learning, and we're all trying new things in terms of how we can use data to create new models and new systems to drive our businesses forward. So with that in mind, I think we have just a phenomenal panel here to help us understand, what they're experimenting with, what they're able to bring to the table to help us all on our journey in terms of new services, products, and thoughts. And they're going to tell us what they're working on right now and why, and impart some great knowledge. So I know we're not going to spend a lot of time on introductions, but I would like each person to just kind of give a, maybe a 30 seconds, minute on who you are, where you came from, and what you do. And we'll jump into some questions from there. I'm going to try and keep my questions. I'm not going to hog the questions. I'm going to do about 20 minutes questions and leave it open to you guys for the last 20. And then we'll be done. Brad?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MillerCoors Pub. I I am the VP of Media and Consumer Engagement here at MillerCoors. I've been with the company, which is hard to believe, about 10 and a half years. I was one of fun fact, one of the first employees in this building. And one of the things I remember one of the first weeks we were in this building is that we had a company-wide meeting here at somewhere around 3 o'clock in the afternoon where everyone got a beer and got to cheers. And I looked at the other office buildings down on both sides of the building, and you saw these people's faces, like mouths dropping, And so we're very fortunate to have this space, and we're really happy to have you all here. In my role, I head up our internal media team as well as some other functions of the organization, precision and digital marketing as well. And so we are really focused on this topic, as you can imagine, as most companies are.
Is this working? You can hear me? Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Sadie from Google, and I am...
What's that?
Google it, I know. So I have been there 8 years or so. I'm the director overseeing all of our creative partnerships for the US. We work closely with creative agencies and clients directly to essentially consult on what can be done with our data and what can be done in terms of creative possibilities with our tech and our platforms. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I work for Annalect, which is the data and analytics engine, really, of Omnicom. Anyone know Omnicom? Yeah, large agency, sure. Right. So core to our offering is a platform called Omni, which we're going to be talking a little bit about today. I don't know, who hands MarTech, AdTech, data analytics? Anybody? Bueller?
Are you asking if heard of those words?
Just to figuring out kind of how geeky. You let me know, obviously, but we can get pretty geeky if you want to. Yes, as was suggested earlier, kind of we're all about addressability at scale. For us, data creativity means using kind of the cliched, putting the right message in front of the right person at the right time by the right channel. It's amazing. I've been with Omnicom for over 15 years, and back in the day we talked a lot about those exact same things, but it was first of all, it was pretty much confined to the expertise of CRM, which would allow you that level of precision, but we could talk about 7-to-1 return on marketing investments and things like that, but really didn't move the needle as it applied to a client's business. The wonderful thing about the digital media environment today, and increasingly other touch points, is that they are increasingly measurable, they are increasingly customizable, they are throwing off data, and we have the marketing technology and advertising technology necessary to be able to not only harness that data in very close to real time, but also manipulate it for the purposes of activating it to make good on that value proposition that we put forward back in the day as kind of an espoused theory. Now we have it as kind of a theory in use. Very excited to tell you more about kind of how we're doing that on behalf of our clients.
Okay, thank you guys. So let's start with Brad. So MillerCoors, as you guys have all had the opportunity to see or be reminded of, has a stable of fantastic brands and iconic brands and new brands being offered into growing and changing categories. But beer and spirits, if you haven't noticed, has become incredibly competitive. And it's a dynamic category. So I'm just wondering, with all of the data and technology being brought into your business, how are you leveraging it to create some competitive advantage now?
Yeah, I mean, like most CPG, right, it's data could be a challenge for CPG in general. We're just not as data rich as other categories, whether you're in financial services or the travel business. There's so many other categories direct to consumer that have so many opportunities to collect data that we've never had, right? So we're very envious of companies that have those capabilities in-house. And I was actually, I thought about this question ahead of time. Was on this floor earlier today talking about, to our entire marketing organization, talking about data as an enabler. And so when we think about building what we think about marketing overall, and the vision that we're putting out there and wanting to be closer to real time, wanting to be closer to behavior, understanding consumer behaviors, the backbone of that in most cases is data. The challenge is how do you harness the data? And most companies have a lot of data that they're bringing in, but they don't have a way to harness it. And so as we think about what we're going to do moving forward from a data standpoint, it is how do we understand and audit the data we have, and how do we build the systems in place that allow us to harness it, to use the data in a meaningful way that are going to drive value on the business. And that's how you create, become more competitive in a category that's become increasingly competitive, because the winners in the category, the winners in any category in my mind, are the ones that learn how to harness the data and action it in a way that drives value at scale. And you look at the beer category overall, like the backs of the beer category are built on marketing, mostly mass marketing, right? And you see TV, sports in particular, but we know consumer choice, consumer behavior is changing. You know that, TV viewing is down. There's obviously a lot of polls into a lot of places that are and have advertising formats in front of them, like the Netflixes of the world. And so having data at your fingertips to understand the audiences that are going to be most meaningful, and then creating marketing messaging that is mostly relevant to them in the places that matter most are how I think we win.
Is there any specific programs that you guys are working on that have you accepted?
Yeah. We started about a year and a half ago getting better at what we call pre-shot media, right? And so we think about, we know behaviorally there's a large segment of consumers that stop at a C-store on their way home and pick up a 24-ounce can of beer. It's kind of an unwind type of opportunity. And so we said, and we know the decision is made really close to the purchase. Like they go in, they don't necessarily know what they're going to buy. So how can we get closer to that, right? How can we make sure our messaging breaks through and can be disruptive in that moment? And so we started to create more geofence type of advertising opportunities, working with MarTech companies that allowed us to do that and deliver specific messaging creatively and from a media standpoint that kind of tied back to that occasion. And so it's been highly successful for us. It's something we'll continue to do, and that's an example of how we're harnessing data.
That's great. That's really good. So Sadie, as working with Google, one of the world's biggest media platforms and one of the biggest sources of data.
Brad's never heard of them.
And new to Brad today. What are some of the new services and tools that you guys are either have launched or are working on to help those of us in marketing harness power of data for creativity?
So we do have some new data tools, but there's also just some existing tools that I think are probably a bit underutilized that are out there too. So for example, Google Trends is something that anyone could look at right now and see what the world is searching for. And so yesterday, by the way, I looked at it this morning. Yesterday, the top searches for the U.S. were the Bucks. If anyone's a basketball fan. Yes, one person. Yes. Okay. Okay. Another one was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because it just debuted in Cannes. And another one was REO. If anyone's heard about that person using REO and Oreo.
Speedway?
REO, real estate term. If anyone saw.
Yeah.
Okay. So look that up, Google that later, you'll see what I'm talking about. But anyway, that's just interesting. So you can start to get a pulse for what are people searching out, what are they talking about, what's the cultural conversation. And so that's a big tool for us, a big data tool, in looking at the database of intentions, which is what we call search often. We also are looking at trends of what people are watching, what kind of videos people are watching, what different audiences are watching. And so when we start to, and what we're doing now, we have new tools now that can kind of overlay some of those different pieces. So you get a much richer understanding of audience. If you understand what the search intentions are, if you understand what they're watching, you can start to understand a deeper, richer level of different audiences. And so what's interesting to us is then, and Brad mentioned this briefly, was how do you then turn that audience insight into the work? How do you convert that into more interesting creative routes and different versions? And what can you do to really speak to these different audiences in a unique way? So one of our newer tools worth mentioning is Director Mix, if anyone's heard of that, which is essentially a tool that enables personalization at scale. So it's a way to sort of take a video and swap in different headlines, swap in different product shots in a very seamless, easy way, and a lightweight production way. So that we're working with a lot of clients and agencies to think through how could you version and create hundreds of versions and then start to optimize to see which audiences are reacting to what. And it's really interesting. So those are just a few things that we're looking at now. There's a variety of data, as Jeff mentioned, but those are some things that I think we're talking about most recently.
So are there any examples of brands or companies that have adopted some of these tools, or maybe some other things from Google that you're pretty excited about and you'd want other people to know
Yes.
about?
Well, for MillerCoors, for director makes MillerCoors. So MillerCoors has worked with us last year on Soul, and we did a big director's mix effort. So we utilized the technology to essentially create 36 versions of bumpers, 18 in English, 18 in Spanish, and they're all tailored toward different content and performed very well. We saw great lifts in recall and awareness. So that's one example, just because we're here. But also we're proud of it too. Another one that's different from director mix, just to shift gears for a second, is we worked with Comcast Xfinity, and they did a really cool campaign that really harnessed the power of data. Essentially what it was is they created pre-roll ads that were targeting competitive carriers and targeting to say, here's how much you would save if you switched to Xfinity. So if I'm an AT&T customer and I'm watching a video, I'm watching the Bucks highlights, watching a sports highlight, and I might get a pre-roll that says, if you were to watch this and switch to Xfinity, you would save a specific dollar amount in data if you were to switch to us. So we tailored the exact dollar amount to how long that subsequent video was. And it was super smart, different versions, so I knew the carrier, we knew how long the next video was and so how much you would calculate to save. That helped drive 10,000 new customers, 3 times their search lift. Really fantastic. They also picked up a few Lions last year. So that's a good one.
That's great. So in the beginning, Lauren, you were talking a little bit about Omni, and can you explain, and I know it's fairly sophisticated, but in the simplest terms, could you explain the platform and how it helps clients and agencies work with the data better?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I'd love to refer back to both what I was talking about and Sadie to talk about how platforms like Omni can facilitate exactly those kinds of solutions. So first and foremost, the thing that's important about Omni, differentiating if not unique, is we've been talking about a number of different data sources. I was talking about geodoming, which is going to require something like a place IQ, or it's going to require a ground truth. We talked about understanding purchase level data, so we're talking about potentially our IRI data or other kinds of data that are similar. Certainly there's Google data. We just talked, in fact, I'll talk in a moment about, we have a tool that's not terribly dissimilar called Content Inspiration. That's part of the Omni platform. It's one of the applications in the Omni platform that actually takes in the entire YouTube fire hose. It's interesting because it's not just for the purposes of activation. We have something that we call programmatic creative for the purposes of activation. But what this is an insight tool. So it actually pulls in. So once you build an audience in Omni, and we'll talk about how that works in just a moment, you then can, because we create this agile idea, again, to cut from course a little bit, but you can build an audience and then pull the YouTube videos that audience is viewing, use a learning algorithm so that it can watch those videos on your behalf, frame by frame, metadata tag the images that it finds in those videos, and then codify them together for the purposes of insight. So you can say, oh, and that can be done very close to real time. So that's a really cool way where we can use a particular data source for the purposes of allowing creative directors, let's say, for example, a creative agency, to have the kinds of insights that are necessary to create organic content that we know that resonates. So just as an example of using the data. But the point that I was making earlier is you have all of these different kinds of data. In Omni, we use over 60 different data sources, inclusive, of course, of Google and Amazon and a number of others, but IRI, ground truth, etc. Each one of those things adheres to its own taxonomy, right? By the way, you have cookies and device IDs, right, and all of those other, right? A taxonomy, fancy word for a language that it speaks, if you will. They all speak different languages. When we say that Omni is a people-based solution, what we're suggesting, what we do, is we take all of those different languages and in essence apply a Babel fish, right? We a translation layer that brings them all into a lookup table so that we can understand not just those two-dimensional views that you understand about purchase level or location or whatever, but understand them all at the individual level. So it makes it three-dimensional, and that allows us a people-based understanding. So we can understand you at many different touch points, we can understand you across many different criteria, and being able to do that now gives us an opportunity to talk with them as people, to interact with them as people, instead of as cookies or device IDs, et cetera, right? If you're working in a DMP, you're working with cookies. If you're working with TAPAD, you're working with device IDs. Oftentimes you're talking to the same people many, many, many times and just not realizing it because of those discrete taxonomies. Once we build that Agile ID, we now in Omni have a portfolio of applications that sit almost as kind of a numerator to that translation layer that we can now push these people into for the purposes of understanding them. One is content inspiration, which we just mentioned, but we can build audiences because within the Agile ID, we use LiveRamp, because I'm familiar with LiveRamp, right? What LiveRamp does. We use LiveRamp to bring the sources together, and then sources like NewStar and others for the purposes of identity. We can now build audiences, understand those audiences again multi-dimensionally, and now push them into a tool that allows us to do programmatic creative. We have helped other telephony clients do very similar things, and we can do it though, we call it pro-targeting instead of retargeting, because we don't have to wait for them to do things to respond to it, because we built the audience first. And we tie that into a data asset management system, which again, metadata tags the assets, and then creates decision rules to drive custom creative. And then we use multivariate testing on the back end for the purposes of optimization. All of that can happen in the same platform. So those are the kinds of things that we expect to be able to do within Omni to allow our clients to have more personalized, more deeper, more meaningful and relevant relationships with their customers.
It's really, really interesting. And there's not going to be a test on any of that.
I told you, I warned you, I'm sorry.
Yes, stopped it.
The winner gets a big one.
That was layman's terms.
That was layman's terms. I've heard the more technical version of it. And, no, but it's super interesting. And what I love, Lauren, is the ability of when you create an audience that's personalized, that has the benefit of not being attached to one version of data, and you get the full picture. You're able to work with that audience from an insight standpoint, really understand what they care about, be able to then think about, okay, where are they showing up in the world, and actually buying a lot. So much of our world has traditionally been, we profile audiences, but then we can't go buy them exactly by,
That's
lookalikes. So that the tool's great for that, and it tracks it all the way through to performance. And for us, and what Brad was talking about in terms of being able to close the loop for like a CPG client, that's pretty great.
Yeah, just to that exact point, because we have multiple sources of data, we're able to tie in purchase level data with brand preference level data, with specific, again, using location, with specific retailers, and understanding when those moments of truth are, so to be able to not have to model, right? I'm sure you guys hear a lot of talk about probabilistic data. I probabilistic data and deterministic data. Probabilistic data, fancy word for data you guess at, right? Model data. Data that exists in a black box that they tell you, well, we think, you hear a lot about lookalike models. How much do they look alike? Hard to say, because it's model data. Deterministic data. Google, great for deterministic data. Data you can't see, data you observe. The key is to use data you observe as much as possible and model data as little as possible. So being able to have all of these different data sources gives you the opportunity to craft your own audiences using data you observe. I'm using Spotify data, I'm using Live Nation data. Those are first-party data sources on their behalf that I'm using. Not that I don't use DMP data, but understand that DMP data will tell you that this audience is made up of moms who drive minivans, and then will also tell you that it's middle-aged guys that drive Porsches. And you'll say, how can those be the same? Well, they index high on this and they index high on that. That's what model data does. And that's why we're moving increasingly to deterministic data.
So, Brad, when you and I were talking earlier, you raised the issue of, people in my business and creative agencies, that we've been a little bit slower, struggled with our ability to use data in the creative process and deliver. So I'm going to be selfish for a second. I'm going to ask her what advice you'd have if you were back on the agency side on how to change what we do, what we do better.
I mean, I think this is like the age-old question, right? Because creative, by the nature of the word creative, right? Data can be creative limiting if you're just so reliant on what data provides you. And so I can see creatives that got into that field or said, like, I want to be inspiring, I want to come up with really big ideas. In large cases, there's a lot of art to that. And some of the most well-known creative campaigns of our lifetime or previous, right, it all stems from an inspired thought and something that stands out. And data wasn't necessarily at the top of the list. It probably wasn't the 20th thing on the list. They probably had some insights, audience insights that made its way in that were resonated within the idea itself. And so creative is art and science, can be art and science. I think it leans more on art. And so I think creative agencies, we've debated this on the pre-call a little bit, which is good, because I think creative agencies have been historically on the back foot in this space. I think media agencies or other parts of the business or MarTech or even clients themselves, such as us, have leaned more into data. Wouldn't you rather have data to make decisions, right, type of remit, whereas creative agencies are like, well, I want to be inspiring, I want the idea to stand for something first. But I do think they are trying to catch up, they're trying to find out ways to embed data into their solutions. I think they haven't fully, it's a different type of work, and I don't know if they've fully kind of figured that out yet.
Yeah, well, it is different. I think it is the journey that we're all on. And it's going to be interesting how it all shakes out, but it is a transition where I think having folks like Sadie and Lauren, but Sadie, you're working a lot with creative agencies right now in terms of how to get people comfortable with data and what the power of creativity is when you unlock it. So can you talk a little bit about what you're doing in that front?
Yeah, sure. And I think one of the barriers we're still hearing a lot is access to data for creative agencies. A lot of them don't even see the same data that the clients are seeing or the media agencies are seeing. So already they're kind of at a bit of a disadvantage because they don't have the same level of information to act on. So that's step one, is making sure if you work with a creative agency or if you are a creative agency, ask for the data, ask to make sure you can see all of that as well. So I think that's step one, to just have that foundation. The conversations we're having with creative agencies are around how you can turn those data points and signals into really interesting jumping off points for storytelling. Because, back in the day, in the beginning of creativity, there was always some sort of jumping off point. It was always some sort of insight that would lead to a big idea. And so the conversations we have now are kind of threefold. It's number one, it's how do you get interesting, rich audience insights into the strategy? So are your data strategy teams and your strategists knowing the data they can access? Are they knowing how to leverage the different tools? And how are they going deep on audience? Because an audience, we've all raised it thus far, but audience is such a big topic right now because demo is really, it feels so antiquated to think about demo. We often have the slide that we share that shows Prince Charles and the demo for Prince Charles. And then who else has the exact same demo as Prince Charles? Ozzy Osbourne. Yeah. Okay. So we know that's not the same person. And so, that's just a straight up example of demo is just not going to work anymore for us. So if that's the case, what do we really know and how can we dig into audience? And that's an amazing jumping off point for creatives. Creatives are craving that. They're craving to know more about the audience and go deep. So that's sort of how do we get the richer audience springboards. The second area is just around the creative possibilities. So we talked about director mix before. We're talking a lot about sequencing right now. So you mentioned it briefly, Lauren, but the notion of just, how can you look at the data to see what are people watching, what are they skipping, what could you serve them next? it's just thinking through how do you sequence and how do you unveil, episodic type of ways. It's interesting for creatives to storytell in that regard. And the third piece I would just say is how do you look at data and have creative agencies look at data and they get excited about this too, is just to figure out if your work is working. If you're creative, you want to make sure people are watching what you've done. So if you see that people are dropping off, they're only watching 10 seconds of a 60-second something or other, that's a problem. So how do you understand that? And as a creative, you want people to appreciate your work. You spend a lot of time on it. So, giving those insights into the analytics side of it is really important. And I think that also just sort of signifies that we're in a world right now where there is a need for change management in terms of thinking in a more, agile way when it comes to making. If we put something out there, we can really test and learn from it. So we're trying to do that all the time with our clients and agencies. Let's put something out there, let's get a read on it, because we can get a read from that data quickly, and then let's figure out how to optimize, whether on the fly, if people are ready for that, and they should be, or for next time. So oftentimes we say, when you get the learnings from the end of a campaign, that's not the end of the campaign, it's actually the beginning of the next one. So how do we continually have that loop to inspire the creatives?
So what you're describing is so much a big part of the shift that we're in the middle of, because when a creative would get a brief, you're making a big story or you're making a piece of content and there was a deadline and you finish it, you were done. And now it's an ongoing process with iteration, optimization, episodic next, what comes next, how do you connect next, and all of that. So as we're transitioning to that kind of thinking, Lauren, mass media is not entirely dead yet. How do you recommend, how can data help us blend or combine the power of a mass audience with more segmented audience strategies and thinking?
Yeah, great question. Not only is mass media not dead, I think that actually the opportunities that we have now in data and in MarTech are making mass media work better than ever. Depending, I guess, on your definition of mass media. Certainly, if anyone's familiar with Ehrenberg Bass, the kind of reach plus one, strategy, no segmentation, particularly, by the way, in CPG, that's a really interesting point of view. I'm not suggesting Mad Men type strategies, but the opportunity to leverage data for the purposes of understanding behaviorally opportunities, react to opportunities in almost real time, very short term stead, allows us to take a mass media approach, at least as it applies to kind of our buying, but use very customized tools. You micro segment large amounts of people without having to go through the complexity of what it used to take to segment messages, right? That's what data, and certainly, by the way, another interesting thing, Omni, of course, came out of a need to do exactly those kinds of things in media. We now use Omni across all of our agencies in Omnicom. Creative agencies, media agencies, specialty agencies, because data needs to become the lingua franca across all of those agencies so as to be able to create a whole greater than the sum of the parts. So the answer to the quick question about kind of how do you make mass work, or how does data make mass work better, is twofold. One, it gives you the opportunity to create those more customized communications using mass strategies. But two, it also allows creative to become not just the stuff that you do at the beginning and then wait for the canned lines to come at the end. It's actually very much part of the process throughout. We use a tool called JumpShot, a data source called JumpShot, which gives us the entire click stream of the cohorts that we build, all of it, right, for 30 days. It's not panel, the whole thing. When we regress that data out, we can find really exciting and interesting pockets of behaviors associated with specific brand interactions. That's super important for creative people to be involved in, because now it's not just a big idea, it's a sequence of great ideas that build relationships over time. And that can be done using media, just the messaging and the way you create experiences.
Okay. I mean, very interesting.
For the layperson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah.
So I think you want to we want to open it up to your questions now.
So I come from the healthcare industry, provider systems. We have a ton of data, right? What's your advice to the healthcare industry and how to use the data for advertising and helping people be healthier, but not doing it in a creepy way?
I'm not an expert in HIPAA law, but
We can use the data however we want for our purposes, even HIPAA data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Legally, my understanding, I'm not a compliance person, but we can use the data, we just can't sell it.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. So I can speak to that because the healthcare space, in the payer space, but also in the pharma space, and even in the healthcare provider space, is an amazing opportunity to add value through data, through utility for patients and for physicians. HIPAA compliance is a big deal as it applies to the regulatory oversight. Do not fool yourself. And by the way, creepy is only creepy if it's perceived to be creepy, right? So otherwise it's perceived to be value added, right? So there are wonderful data sources out there that are deterministic in DRG, IQVIA, even if you understand how to use it properly, Crossix, Truden, good data sources in the healthcare space that if you use LiveRamp properly, if you use a clean room so that you hash the data properly, can be ingested into a system where you can help patients and healthcare providers, in essence, be understood as people. And then once you understand that, we just did a super interesting thing with a healthcare client that works with with sickle cell anemia. I won't talk about the people who suffer from sickle cell anemia. That's a horrible disease, right? They need a huge amount of support and strength from the communities that serve them. Understanding how to use data so as to be able to provide those moments of service, because as it turns out for sickle cell, by the way, mostly a disadvantaged audience, socioeconomically, right? They need that help. Understanding from the data where the moments are that matter, what channels you can interact with them. As it turns out, they're not in certain places, but they love streaming content, and we know where we can find them with streaming content, so that we can create things like VOC is like when they have these moments of pain. VOC playlists, they're looking for coping content. They're looking for, we can help them with those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that healthcare providers, on every side, payer, that they should be looking to use data to create utility and value and meaningful experiences. And you will absolutely be able to do that in the current marketing, technology, and data environment. Yeah, and happy to talk to you about it because I feel pretty strong. Data for good, you know.
Hi, can you talk, a lot of what you've talked about is consumer packaged goods. Can you talk about luxury, bespoke products, and maybe have a longer sales cycle, higher price points? Like, it might be premium, you know, it's kind of a different animal sometimes, but can you speak to that? The insights or?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of work with auto. We do a lot of luxury type of partnership. You know, I think what we've done with auto is we have a whole path to purchase data report that we've put out because there are so many touch points. I mean, there's so many people that watch videos on YouTube of people just driving cars. That's a method to understanding, you know, what you want to buy. So we're kind of looking at all the path to purchase, you know, between search, video, voice, whatever it might be, to think through what do you want to say at those different touch points because there's different parts of the funnel that are activating at those different moments. So, you know, a big conversation we're having now is sort of the full funnel approach that you take. So understanding different paths to purchase, there's a stage for awareness, what do you do there? There's a stage for consideration when you're getting toward purchase intent, how you're driving them to, you know, do a test drive, for example. So we just have different sort of methodology where we look to understand those different, you know, decision moments and how do you show up with the right message at that time.
Just to piggyback a little bit on that, Google has this amazing product, right, that they use for consumer journeys that they call micro moments, which allow us to understand, back to that clickstream analysis, you can create, kind of use taxonomy for purposes of creating life stages, and you can look at all of the click streams. So, and we do this, we do this. in our consumer journey mapping, to your point about and we can even understand it from a branded standpoint, so we can see how people who are shopping for Chevy are different than people who are shopping for Ford or other brands. And remember, again, this is back to the point about creepy is only if it's perceived to be creepy. So we can look at data, whether it's Place IQ data that tells us when they're visiting a dealership, or again, clickstream data that tells us that they're configuring a car, that they're on KDB or Blue Book or Edmunds or what have you, and we can understand what phase of the shopping process they're in by looking at that and then regressing that out at an audience level. We can then figure out what kinds of communications are required in those moments so that they can function as catalysts to getting them to behave the way you would like to see them behave, obviously, given where they are in the purchase process. In automotive, because it's a very long life cycle, right, about 3 to 5 years to buy a car, there's a very important model that is typically built called an in-market timing model, right? Typically that is probabilistic. With this kind of data, you don't have to be probabilistic around it. You can see the behaviors, identify the behaviors right around when they're in market, and then by the way, pass the communication authority from corporate communications to tier 2 or tier 3, right, the dealerships or the regions, so that they're getting the right message. So you're talking to them about configuring the vehicle up here, but here you're passing it off to even for the purposes of buying search, for example, so that they're getting the deal, they're finding where the inventory is, the specific vehicle that they're looking for. Those are all kinds of ways that data can, and again, in a very customized, programmatic, creative kind of way, right? So it's very easy to create many, many versions very quickly, according to where you see them in the process. That's a great way to add value for folks who are shopping for vehicles, and you can use other long life cycle luxury products, using the data that's available to you from those kinds of sources.
And also add, not related to the path to purchase that we just spoke about, but we're also using machine learning to look at thousands of ads and videos across certain categories. So we just did this with auto, actually, and how to use ML to scan and understand what's the most common uses, or what's showing up in auto ads and what's most effective. Just because it shows up a lot doesn't mean it's always effective. So that's just another sort of, we didn't touch on ML on the panel, but that's obviously a big topic for us in general, is how do you harness the power of machines to give you insights into, what are the category norms, what's working, how might that inform your creative decision making too.
And I know this isn't a question, but I think it's worth pointing out that we didn't talk about today. So there's a lot of ways to harness data. I think one of the things to always keep in mind when we talk about data is infrastructure too, right? So there's a lot you can do, and it can become overwhelming. When I hear the example of what we can do with auto and consumer journey mapping, and you look at those models and those opportunities, if you don't have the right infrastructure in place or the right external partnerships in place, it's paralysis, right? There's not much you can do. So I think it's incredibly important to say, what are the resources I need internally? What are the types of people I need? What are the capabilities I need to build to be able to use the data in a way that's going to be valuable for the business? Or who are the external partners out there that have the capabilities? And quite honestly, the MarTech space, I mean, if you look at the amount of options available in that space, that can be overwhelming in its own right.
The overlap too.
Yeah. I mean, they overlap. They all say, there's a lot of we're the only ones that do this, right? But it's important to have people that really understand it, that they can assess and evaluate this. And you're not going to get it right out of the gate every time, but I do think having the right people is really critical.
Yeah, I think you got to have people in the room that know enough about Marcom in this space to be able to go through it. But then it's the experimentation and trying little things and building towards what the infrastructure needs to be.
So I understand that my background is multicultural, so I understand that multicultural lives in the intersection between demo and audience. But I think that one of the barriers that we face is sometimes we hear that there's not enough data to inform multicultural decisions, U.S. Hispanics, although it's a very important audience for Cape Line, for example, we know that very well. So the question to the whole entire panel is, do you have enough data that inform your decision about how much invest in this audience or not? And to both of you is how you are harnessing this data so we can, develop solutions for clients such as the other key client.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously multicultural is really important to a lot of categories, including our the beer category and with new brands. And as we try to recruit that younger legal drinking age consumer, right there, by definition, a much more polycultural audience. I mean, I guess my only slight shift to the question is that I think the real opportunity is understanding the attitudes and behaviors and starting to coalesce around what are the behaviors of certain audiences. Doesn't matter as much to me what they define themselves as much as what are the behaviors they're doing, and are there certain behaviors that follow certain cultural norms or certain cultural moments that then you want to have a message that reflects that in those right spots, right? And picking the right language is critical to the moment, and so understanding that. I personally do think there's a lot of data out there that allow us to get to that. I don't think it's that hard.
I think for us, and Paula sitting in the front row works on our multicultural team at Google. Similar notion, we try to find out what are the interesting, rich cultural insights so that we can understand, again, the deeper, richer audience, learning to be able to say the right things and have the right communication, have it feel authentic. We definitely hear a lot with the creative agencies we partner with that they're having a hard time sometimes getting to those rich insights. So we try to leverage the data that we can to help add more color and context to that. There are some targeting limitations, as you know, so that's, I think, where it gets difficult. But we need to be obviously respectful of that too, because that's a privacy issue that we take very seriously. So I think it just comes down to this, how do we understand those cultural nuances or feed that into the brief, or partner. Oftentimes what we do with YouTube is partner with creators that are within that world as well, because that's very authentic, and we know that there's audiences that are pre-established that can be reached that way. So I think we kind of do a combination to figure out how we can get, again, back to that deep audience connection.
Not much to add other than to say there is plenty of data as it applies to multicultural audiences. Absolutely. Harder as it applies to, of course, as we suggested, targeting, but for the purposes of understanding rich insights, we feel that there is a very robust source of data for most cultural micro cohorts.
That's last call.
Expected to stampede to the bar.
Is that a hook for Lawrence?
Yeah, the only other, I'd just finish by saying one of the things that we do as we think about insights, particularly as multicultural, is we try to leverage the power of influencers in those cohorts. They tend to be important gatekeepers and expediters of engagements that we try to create on behalf of our clients. We don't pretend to be able to, because of the targeting issues that we have, we recognize the opportunity that exists in identifying influencers and expeditors and creating experiences that they can then translate to the larger.
And by the way, when I said creators, those are influencers.
Yes.
Sorry if anyone didn't realize that.
I got that. Yeah.
So we have time for one or two more questions right here.
Okay. Question about the process and the output of data-driven campaigns. So obviously the promise is that we can be so relevant to so many subsets of an audience. That brings up questions of like, well, how can we make all this stuff efficiently? Because agencies are being challenged to do basically more with the same or less. So I guess it's a question for both of you guys as client and creative agency. How are you thinking about this? How are you approaching it? And how do you tackle it in partnership or not? Does it lead to friction? Maybe
You go first.
Yeah. Does it lead to friction? That's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, that is a great question. I think that is the question that we're tackling right now, because there is what is the cost benefit, right? Because it costs more to create more assets is it worth paying more to create 100, 200 versions of something versus something that will catch everyone, right? Like play to the median. And so I know there are tools out there. We meet with companies all the time. We have partners with some of them that have services to make it really easy and turnkey to churn out. I know AI, there are AI solutions now available as well that can analyze the data and then spit out a piece of creative based on the data that comes in. And I think in some cases you can obviously work with creative agencies to kind of understand what are the territories you're going to focus on and start to build things from the ground up. But you know, you hear a lot on candidly, you hear a lot about in-housing as the kind of the buzzword right now within the marketing world. You know, building these capabilities so you can do those things with speed. You know that there are tools out there that brand marketers can access themselves, but you still need a creative agency to that umbrella idea needs to still start somewhere. And so how do you find that sweet spot of partnership with the external agencies and the internal group if you do that? Does that get you to the tension?
Yeah. Now I'm curious.
Well, no, it's clearly an evolving model for all of
Yeah.
us. So I mean, there's kind of three pillars of what we're working on. First off, you know, Lauren is Omnicom, we're Omnicom. So Omni is being integrated in basically as our spinal cord in terms of data, audience, understanding, and being able to drive that. And in our case, all the way down through e-com. We're going to try and connect it all, or we are connecting it all. So having that ability to understand the audiences, push it through a media channel, and then understand the results, is going to help us understand the payout, the ROI of how much segmentation is really helpful. And you know, what is that right balance, at least from the media plan standpoint? And then you layer on top of that production. So the good news is we can make things less expensively or more cost efficiently because of technology, better than ever before. And that's all about how do we create new models around that. So we have an in-house studio. You know, if you looked at an agency in-house studio 5 years, 10 years ago, it was, you know, pretty anemic. We have a very robust studio now that not only is able to, you know, it's filled with makers, it's also globally connected with crowdsourcing capabilities so that we can take a brief. So if we want to have like 3 or 4 different audiences, we're able to get makers to make the stuff for us. And then we can even partner with influencers and take it all the way through the line. And then the third thing is just figuring out where and how to use machine learning. So Ben Jones, which is a creative at Google, came to our worldwide conference not too long ago. And we talked about where's the line of where to use machine learning to help offload some of the detail work so the creatives can focus on really truly creative, human, storytelling, innovative, problem-solving kinds of things. So, you know, we're really experimenting a lot with that through different partnerships and different ways of working with, you know, some of these folks and other Marcom partners. But between having that sort of backbone of understanding, okay, what from an ROI standpoint is going to work, how do we fit, how we make things that we want to have our hands on, and then where do we get the machines to do our work for us? It's kind of what we're working on, and it's all in progress.
I'd also just say, just as marketers, to think about, I mentioned earlier the notion of change management and having the ability to think in agile and be comfortable with maybe iteration along the way. I think there's also the notion you set aside a budget for testing and learning, and a lot of clients are doing that now. They're saying, let me, you know, and actually I'll say just firsthand at Google, we test for all of Google's marketing, we test nearly everything before it goes out. And we put it on YouTube. We just put it at small levels on YouTube to get a real life, in the wild read on how it's performing, and then go from there. So I think it's just some of those methods to just getting used to a little experimentation because we don't have all the answers yet. So how can we get them together?
There's a great thing too, like, and our creatives have embraced this, especially over the last year. It's why guess or think when you can know. So we can dark post a piece of content, spend $1,000, drive a couple $1,000, get some traffic to it, understand the engagement rate. We can follow that up with a Google survey, understand quantitatively or qualitatively, depending on how much you track. But what did they actually think of the work? Was it getting the message communication that we want? And you know, as long as we have the time and budget to do that, it works really, really well. We made pretty significant changes to content before we put it in the marketplace, and it's really helped.
I was going to say, to be clear, the asset management systems that create all of the versions that you're talking about, which we have, of course, as mentioned in Omni, are just that, right? They're asset management systems that create versions. They're not to be confused with creative concepting, with big ideas that are absolutely required in order for this stuff to work. It's just facilitating. It's taking some of the cost out of the system so it can be invested into honest to goodness creative. Creative stuff that's truly creative. So there shouldn't be too much attention there, because in reality, it's freeing up creative people to be truly creative.
So you talked a lot about mostly kind of digital market. How does this play into experiential marketing, connecting with people in person?
Well, I think anybody can answer this, but I think the secret is digital is in your hand. I mean, we take mobile everywhere we go, and I think you're geofencing. I mean, we can see what people are doing, where they're doing it better than ever before. But you guys do a lot of experiential for MillerCoors.
I mean, data, it can be captured in all those spaces, and I think it's important to understand the value of those experiences. And again, to the earlier comment we talked about the health industry, it's all about disproportional value, right? So in an experience, there can be a data capture if the value exchange is in favor of the individual that's having the experience itself. And so I think people are willing to share information, share their experience with others. A lot of people post their experiences all the time, right? And so those Instagrammable moments or videos of themselves in those experiences are another form of data capture.
Sure. And exactly, I think to your earlier point, so whether it's ground truth or whether it's Place IQ, they triangulate off of IP of the mobile device IP address. So that's how it works. So the expectation, so those experiences, offline experiences, unless you're turning your phone off, not even if you can phone on actually, they're throwing off data. So we should be able to create value and utility in those experiences offline.
All right, I think we are at the end of our time here. So I just want to say if we can say a big round of thank yous to our panelists. And thank you, MillerCoors, for hosting us. Thanks again for coming to this event. And if you're interested in more Innovation Forum events, we'll have another one coming up on June 11th at KPMG. And the title is Seeing Signals of Change. Also, Michelle Gass, CEO of Kohl's, will be speaking at the club on June 5th about her innovative approach to reviving brick and mortar retail. And they do have some really great ideas. I'd encourage you to come and see that. You can sign up for all of the events on the Executive Club website. Thanks again, and enjoy your really warm Chicago evening. Okay.